Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm very pleased to have on Locke Haman. And I found him on Instagram. One guy named Justin Lovato that I had an interview with, he shared this video to me of Locke explaining why he feels like every father should have a daughter. And I really found the video useful and interesting. And then I looked at his page and I saw he had a podcast called Trailblazers and Chain Breakers with his wife. And I think he's posting a message on the importance of marriage, fatherhood, self-development. And I just really was appreciative for you to come on. Thanks for coming on, Locke.
Yeah, thank you for asking me. It's a privilege. I'm excited.
So, Locke, what inspired you to do what you do, create this podcast, this men's group, and just be this profile online of promoting the importance of marriage and fatherhood?
That's a great question. It was a number of things, but I think the most powerful one for me was becoming a father, screwing a lot of it up, and realizing that I wasn't okay with that. And so then it became a quest for getting better. And then I started bumping into, as I searched for people to teach me how to become better, how to become a stronger man, a better father, a better husband. I started to surround myself with people on the same mission, and I started to learn all this stuff. And it dawned on me that, I've been a teacher, I've been a coach almost my entire adult life in various forms. It dawned on me that this isn't exclusive to me. My problems aren't that special, if you want to call it that. And there were a lot of people out there who were hungry for the same kind of message. And so as I learn things, I share them. The videos I make, the things I write, a lot of that stuff is actually written for myself. It's a reminder for myself. And so I share it, and it kind of grew from there. I have a whole career behind me of teaching and coaching, and it just kind of came naturally that, okay, you've figured out a few things, you still screw up a whole lot. That vulnerability in and of itself is helpful to teaching these things as well. Why don't you start putting it out there? Why don't you start trying to help other people along the journey and give them that hand up that was given to me when I was hurting, when I was screwing things up, when I was realizing I'm not really that good a father. I'm not really that good a husband. I don't even really like myself as a man. And so a lot of it stems from that kind of realization. A lot of it stems from not wanting to look back at my life with regret. I think a lot of people have heard this quote that the definition of hell is that on your last day on this earth, the person you are meets the person you could have been. And I looked at that and I said, yeah, I don't want any part of that kind of regret. And then I looked at it from the lens of fatherhood and I said, well, what about a father's hell? What about the last day on this earth? I get to meet the father I could have become, but didn't become because I half-assed it my whole life. I don't want any part of that regret. I don't want to meet the kids that I could have raised, that father could have raised, and have to compare them to, the wounds and the things that I gave to my kids. And so it's just this, I've always had this, this part of me that refuses to give up inside. And it's just turning into that part and then sharing that part with other people and sharing my journey and sharing everything I've screwed up and learned along the way.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring. And what would you say, what is the code for being a good father? You say you screwed up, but do you feel like screwing up is sometimes part of that code? Like in the mistakes, that's actually where the value of you learning comes. And yeah, what makes a good father from what your experience and from what you've read and seen?
Yeah, that's such a loaded question, but it's a good one to have a conversation around. To answer the shorter answer, I absolutely think that screwing things up is necessary. I think that that's necessary, whether it's fatherhood or just becoming an adult, right? The idea of let the kids dent the car, right? Like when you're learning to drive, you're probably gonna, I remember I backed into a mailbox and I put a big old dent on the back of one of our cars. And I did not want to admit where it came from when my dad asked me, but you got to dent the car. You got to get out there. You got to bang around and screw some stuff up. Obviously, you don't want to make huge, life-changing, life-altering mistakes. But I think the fear of screwing things up leads to screwing things up more. And, give you a couple concrete examples about that before kind of diving into the deeper question. But if I screw something up with my wife, let's say, and I owe her an apology and I need to go do that, I could kind of freeze up, refuse to do that because I don't really know how to do it. Maybe I screw things up worse. And that in and of itself is a mistake that's going to hurt. You're better off going and trying to make that apology or apologizing to your kids or whatever it is. You might screw it up, but you need to try. You need to learn how to do it. And so, back to the loaded question, what makes a good father? I don't really have a definition of what makes a good father other than, I would say a good father, a good man, a good husband, whatever category you're looking at it in, is a man that is not content with where he is. That doesn't mean giving himself a bunch of shit and saying, oh, I can't believe you do that. I can't believe you do that. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. No, you can celebrate victories. But to be a good man, you need to be constantly striving to be better. To be a good father, you need to be developing. It's almost like a craft. It's a skill. You need to be developing that skill. And the same thing for being a husband. And so, I don't have a clear cut answer to that. I have a whole lot of like values that are meaningful to me as the father I want to be, but I'm also not naive enough to think that that's the same kind of father that you would want to be when you have kids, that anybody listening to this would want to be. I think there's some like elemental thing, love and acceptance and stuff like that. I think we all know that, but I think your original question hit it on the head. Get in the car, dent the car a little bit. Don't be afraid to make the mistakes, but when you make the mistakes, you don't shame spiral into them and avoid fixing them. You turn into the mistakes and you say, listen, honey, or you talk to your kids, listen, I shouldn't have done that. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done what I just did. I'm going to own it. Here's how I'm going to make it better. And we all learn from the mistakes. And ultimately, when I look at the type of father I want to be, what it boils down for me, my deeply personal answer is I need to be modeling the things that I want my kids to take. And I was different. I have one son and I have 3 daughters. It's different for my son as it is for my daughters, a different like lens. And you mentioned that video I made about why I wish every father had a daughter. And it's because it broadens the perspective that we look at fatherhood and manhood in. And, if I'm looking at my son, I'm modeling what a man is supposed to be. Me being a good father for my son is being a good man and making sure he sees it and he learns that. Me being a good father for my daughters is modeling the relationship that they're going to look for when they grow up. And for me, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but for me, that difference kind of exploded my brain. It was, I had, my son is the oldest. And when I had my first daughter, this thought process of, okay, I'm looking at the world through a man's perspective. Now I have to stop. And instead of worrying about modeling it for my son, which is a heavy burden in the best possible way, now it's like completely foreign to me to now say, oh crap, my daughter is going to marry someone someday. What do I want that man to be like? Am I going to be, like those stereotypes, like that dad that just messes with the son-in-law and intimidates him and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, I kind of want to do that stuff. The wise ass of me kind of wants to do that stuff. But ultimately, if I take 100% accountability for the reality that she's going to look for someone very similar to me, that thought process completely rewrote how I thought about being a father. And in turn, how I thought about being a man. And even how I thought about being a husband, because the first piece of that is, are you acting like the man that you want your daughter to eventually marry? But then the second piece that affects my relationship, and it kind of blew my brain there, is, am I treating my wife the way that I would expect my daughter to be treated? Right. And so it adds all these wrinkles, and it comes back to me, my definition of being a good father for myself is, am I acting in a way that I want my son to be or my daughters to seek out in a mate?
Wow. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I see how, having a son versus having a daughter can be a different game in some sense, where it's like, the son and you are slightly competing. Like, he wants to, you're competing in the sense, like, you want to show him the best version of a man you can be or a person can be. And then he's going to grow up and want to, try to beat that, or like the father son competition, where I never even thought about this daughter side, where it's like, as a father, you want to be the type of man that you would want her to start dating and marry. It's like you're wanting to be that model. And it's like, you're right, that it seems to be like a pretty high bar to set, but it's like, in life, why not give yourself such high bars to set? Because if you don't set high bars for yourself, you're not going to reach the level of potential that you've been born with. And that's where it's like, I kind of want to lead into this question of, do you feel like every person should think about having a kid, or do you feel like everyone should be a parent?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that's such a deeply personal decision, but I think the thought process is one that can benefit everyone. Now, that being said, like, you can think before you have kids, am I acting like the man I would want my son to be, or the man I would want my daughter to marry? But it doesn't carry, you can have the thought process, but it doesn't carry the same weight because it's not real yet. Okay. And so I've talked about this idea that I needed to be a father before I could truly become an adult, if that makes sense, right? So, like, in order to truly grow up, I needed the responsibility of, okay, you can think through that thought process, but there's nothing on the line until you actually have a son or a daughter. And so I needed that on the line. And I had, you know how people on the internet are. I've had people in the comments section of a bunch of different videos basically saying, this is a great sentiment, but why did you need a daughter? Or why did you need to become a father at all in order to start acting like this? Why can't you be like this for your wife? Or why can't you just be a good man to begin with? And like, I kind of get where they're coming from, but I think you're completely missing the point. It's like, there's no shame in needing a wake-up call. The shame is in not answering the call. And so if the wake-up call for me was having kids, great. Like, I'll celebrate that. If the wake-up call for someone is getting married, and having to be the best husband or wife in that case that they can be, like, great. As long as you answer the wake-up call, who cares how it comes? And if we're going to nitpick, like, yeah, I probably should be the best man I could be for my wife, regardless of my kids. And yeah, I probably should be, not probably, definitely should be the best man I could be just for myself, just to make the world a better place. And yet I needed to reframe my perspective by having kids. And there's no shame in that. And so, I talk to a lot of different dads that feel this same pull. And like you were saying, you feel this without even having kids yet. It's like, well, if that's the wake up call that you needed, great. Who cares that you needed a wake up call? I would be much more concerned about not answering that call.
Yeah, that's a really, really good answer. And, like you said, it's probably individualized. Not everyone maybe even needs to have a kid to reach the best version of themselves. But it seems like a lot of people, and you, like you were mentioning, like, it sometimes is like you're not even aware of some of the flaws you have, maybe until you have a kid, and then you're forced to probably hyper analyze yourself in a different way. And I feel like that, like you said, I like that, where it's like sometimes a wake up call, that doesn't mean that you should feel shame or guilt. It's like, it's actually like optimistic. It's like, wow, I just received like information on how to improve, and now I'm going to improve. It's like, I think that's really, really good. And
I think rephrasing, like, you look at the kids are so great at triggering your flaws, at calling attention to your flaws. And you can get frustrated with your kids and you can say, I can't believe they're doing this, that, or the other thing. Or you can look at it and say, this is an opportunity to do the work on myself. This is an opportunity to fix this problem that they're calling to my attention. And if you want to go like way farther, can you be grateful to your kids for shining that spotlight on your wounds, on your triggers? Right? I have a friend who at one point had said that his son had the cheat codes to triggering him. And it was like, we were working on that relationship, and it's like, well, it actually turned into a great thing because his son was able to show him all of these wounds from his childhood that once he addressed them, he became a better man. And it's like, what a gift unknowingly for a child to give their parents, this opportunity, this spotlight on all the things that they need to do some work on to become a better person.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I well, I come from like a Christian community, and I was just thinking of like this idea, like Paul like would call people to be single, and it's like, you know, for me, I just don't feel like I that calling is for me. I feel like my calling is to try to have kids, and through them I can become a better person. But like
Mm.
you said, like it's not like it's not like, I don't even know how to phrase this, but it's like the kids help in the improvement. It's not like you're relying on them, but it's like on the other hand, you somewhat are, and it's an interesting relationship. And
Yeah.
I don't know why I think of Paul, but like sometimes, like when I was younger, like only like 4 years ago, I was like, I'm gonna be single my whole life, and then like I changed a bit, grew up a bit, and I'm like, wow, no, life just seems so much better if you don't just live for yourself, in a sense where it's like, it's this idea of like, if you, let's say you have a dog and you go to the vet, and you're like, the vet's like, you got to make sure to give this, this animal, this pill every day at this period of time. And then if you go to the doctor and they're like, oh yeah, make sure to do this physical therapy on yourself, or take this thing every period. It's like, you're sometimes more apt to help another person, whether it be a kid, someone else, an animal, instead of yourself. And it's like, I can see how living life trying to assist others and living for others instead of just yourself can add a level of meaning that is almost impossible to reach on your own. I don't know what you think of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that was very well said. And a couple things that brings to mind is the first is, it sounds cliche, but this idea that I've learned through experience that giving is essentially receiving, right? And you take that to knowledge, especially. And that comes back to, I think the first question you asked me, kind of like, how did I get here, right? And I realized I spent a couple years teaching high school. I had no background I was a high school science teacher. I had no background in the subject. And it's a little bit of a longer story than this, but it's a good story. But the short version is, I signed the contract and I started like 5 days before school started. They had just lost a teacher, and they said, "Oh, just stay a day ahead of the kids in the textbook." And I was like, "Well, okay, I guess so." I realized, long story short, what I realized was I had never learned anything as well as when I had to teach it the next day to the kids. And so this giving is receiving. It's teaching can be learning, right? In order to really embody these things that I'm learning, by turning around and teaching them first to my kids, because I want to prepare them for life, and then to my clients and what the work that I do, I'm learning it on a level that I never would have learned. And so in that sense, giving becomes receiving, right? And so many, fathers that I talk to get stuck in this idea that as a parent, our job is to teach and correct our children. And to a certain extent, it is, right? But they get stuck in this idea that the knowledge transfer between a father and a child is a one-way street. And it's not. Our kids can teach us so much about ourselves, about life, about ourselves, about our wounds, about everything, right? And so if you look at that relationship, whether you're a father or not, I mean, it can be just between friends. Maybe you think you know more about something than someone else. The relationship, the flow of knowledge is not, no matter what you think, like status wise, knowledge, like how much you know, the flow of knowledge is not a one-way street. And that was a big lesson for me becoming a father too, because I went through that stage that I think most dads do, which is like, I have all the answers. I know everything. I've been through this before, and you guys are just kids. So like, sit there and listen to me talk for a while. And it's like, no, there have been times where even my 8-year-old daughter will call me out and be like, well, why do we do something like this? And I'll start to say, well, 'cause this and that. And I'll realize, you know what? You're right. This isn't the best way to be doing things. So yeah, there's so much, we could go on for a long time on that specific question, but there's so much truth there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a pretty huge fan of Jordan Peterson. Yeah, you might even see the book back there. Like, it's kind of inspired me in a lot of ways. But one of the rules, I guess one of the lessons that he talks about is this idea of like, you know, assume the person you're speaking to knows something you don't. And that a lesson can even apply to like young children, where it's like if you have that open mind and your assumptions are just, if you don't have your presuppositions already confirmed or like cemented, and you have an open mind and you're willing to learn, it's like, who knows what a young new individual is going to show you about the world. Like anyone can. And someone with such a young and open mind and just with so much potential, it seems like they could teach you so much. And I see that that's like, you had experiences where it's like, maybe you thought like, I don't know if you thought before you had kids, like, maybe they would teach me this or not, but it's like it's evident now of like, wow, my 8-year-old just opened up my eyes to something that I would have not been able to do on my own. And it's truly interesting to me. And
Yeah.
I was going to, well, if you have anything to say to that, I have a question that also on, well, yeah, go ahead real quick if you have a response.
No, I totally agree. And what I was thinking, within that rule, listen as if as if they have something to teach you, even if they don't, right? So this is a leadership quality. So you're not a father yet and you're listening to this, that's fine. You want to be a leader. Maybe you want to start a business. Maybe you don't care about starting a business, but you want some sort of leadership capability. Listening as if they have something to teach you, even if you know what they're going to say, you're building up their confidence. Okay. So if this is employees or kids or even like you're in your relationship, don't assume you know everything. Even if it turns out you did know what they were going to say, make them feel as if they're valued, right? Like you can't imagine how powerful it is for a 5-year-old, even if she isn't actually teaching me something new, for my 5-year-old daughter to feel like she's teaching me something. It empowers her. It makes her want to go back and learn more, to come back and teach people even more, right? So there's benefits beyond just, oh, I did learn something new and I didn't expect that. That happens all the time, right? That's such a rare attitude. But more than that, you're building up, whether it's children or someone else, you're building up those people, that their confidence, you're building your relationship with them by being present instead of just kind of like listening to wait for your turn to talk. So yeah, I think that was a great analogy or a great connection to that rule.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, yeah, I could just see like even in just friend environments where it's like sometimes if you just allow the person to speak about something, even if you know about it, it's like giving that validation can be such a connection builder, and it builds that person up in so many interesting ways. And yeah, that's going to be a goal of mine. Like so one of my least favorite attitudes on life is like an arrogant attitude, like, oh, I already know what you're going to say. Oh, I already know it all. Like, that's like one of my least favorite kind of attitudes. And I know some people like that. And I'm like, my goal is not to be like that. Like, just like humility, in my opinion, seems to be one of the more important aspects, like for humans in general, but probably being a father as well. Like, certainly. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's sorely lacking in today's world, humility.
Yeah, definitely. I have a few questions, but I think we're going to lead this instead, which is like, you bring up society, and I don't have the exact statistics, but it's like, it seems as if the single motherhood rate is just on the rise. Like, and like the importance of the nuclear family and just marriage and children and that model, like it seems like that society is pushing that under the rug, or saying, oh, that's less important, that's old tradition. Like, I kind of grow up in a age where social media is kind of loud, and you hear people say like, oh, I don't ever want to have kids. And it's like, man, what do you feel like is the, I don't know, the solution to that? Or like, why do you feel like society is pushing away from the nuclear family and like not highlighting the importance of it?
That's an interesting question. I'm sure there's so many pieces there. What that makes me think of is a quote that I'm sure you've heard, Frederick Douglass quote about, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And it kind of ties directly into my mission in the work that I do is to do both of those things. But specifically, I've always looked at leverage. Like I love investing. I'm an investor. I come from a real estate background. And so I'm looking at this with leverage. The leverage right now is in the broken men, if that makes sense. We can go down the topic of why healing or the word broken feels like a dirty word to a lot of men. And that is one problem. But if we can, to your point about the family, if we can bring back strong fathers, and I don't mean like macho men, I have all the answers, strong fathers. I mean the best possible version of strong fathers. Strong, firm, loving. There's still love in a strong father, right? If we can bring that back, if we can repair men, then they're going to raise generations of strong kids. And this realization that I had, like, I want this long list of things for my kids, right? But if I don't know how to do those things for myself, how can I teach them to do it? And so it's like that thought process. If I want my kids to be strong and confident, I have to be strong and confident. I have to teach them how to do that. If I want my kids to be able to stand up to me, or stand up to the world, I have to allow them to stand up to me, right? This whole thought process. And so fathers can affect, if we can bring back a generation of strong fathers, they can affect the children in the world and have these ripple effects. And so I think that's, at least in my perspective, in like the arena that I can control and that I can hopefully make a difference, that's kind of my perspective on that issue. I think I totally agree with you. There's this push, and the motives behind that, we can speculate and we can go into conspiracy theories and all this stuff. And I think that there's a lot of truth there. The bottom line is, what do we do about it? We become better men. We become better husbands or partners. We become better fathers, and we shine that light, right? We cling to that strength in ourselves, and we make the world around us a better place. And if we can bring back a generation of strong fathers, that's going to bring the nuclear family back together. That's going to change the trajectory of a generation of children. And these changes won't happen overnight, but those are the changes that are going to be lasting, right? That's another piece that I think about in fatherhood. My decisions as a father, the way that I'm showing up as a man and the way that I'm parenting my children, it's not just about my family now. It's about ripple effects generations into the future. I'm building the foundation that my great grandkids are going to be building on top of. Now, I can do a terrible job and hope that, like the shanty doesn't fall over and topple in on itself 3 generations from now. Or I can lay the best possible foundation now for the future generations and hope that, like nothing comes in and screws that up. Obviously there's, random things that might affect that generations from now. But that's my take on that. And I don't know if that's where you wanted to go with that. I'm open to other questions on that topic, but this is one of the biggest issues we're facing in this world, right? The family is being eroded, and not even touching on like the masculinity debate, toxic masculinity and masculinity under attack, which we can talk about if you want, but that fatherhood is being attacked. It's one of my pet peeves that our society not only tolerates, but at certain times celebrates shitty fathers. It's unacceptable to me to, just leave if we're going to go straight for the jugular. Like these fathers that just take up and leave. Like that's unacceptable to me, but it's also unacceptable to tolerate being a terrible, mediocre, subpar father. And so, one of my biggest pet peeves with society and how we're looking at things is that in a lot of circles, that's okay. That it's okay to say, oh, that's on the mother. Or like, I'll just disappear to work for 12, 14 hours a day and I'll be physically present in the home, but not mentally, emotionally present for my children. And this is generations in the making, right? And it'll take generations to fix it. But the light that I see, the path that I see out of this is, back to that Frederick Douglass quote, we would love to build strong children, right? Like that would be the easiest, not easiest, but that would be the first place that you would probably go. But before we can do that, we need to repair the broken men, because we can't raise strong children if we ourselves as fathers are the broken men.
Yeah, it's a really great answer. That Frederick Douglass quote is really interesting, and I really like the way you are talking about, like, from an investing standpoint. It's like, maybe in the moment it's sometimes hard to take extra time for other people, such as children or a wife, but it's the long-term investment that creates of, like, thinking generations down the line. It's like, if you're able to have that foresight and to think, like, if my actions can truly build up the next generation and the next, it's like, I'm going to be so focused on doing that, versus if, like, it seems like these days people have this, like, now, like, live in the now, make me happy kind of mindset. And it's like, I'm very glad that there's people like you trying to promote a message of, like, why don't you think a little bit past yourself, because you're not going to be here too long. And, like, you have, your actions will make waves in directions and distances that you can't even fully see yet. And so, like, analyzing the importance of your actions from a butterfly effect standpoint and a long-term leveraging effect. Like, I like that visual you put in my head. It's truly interesting. And yeah, like, I was gonna ask this question of, like, where did the mothers fit in? Like, what are the differences between the importance of a mother and a father? Like, I'm just curious, maybe, like, talking to your wife, like, what did you learn from her, like, when she became a mother? Like, how is that different than being a father? Like, it's interesting how there's differences, but similarities.
Yeah, it is. It's very interesting. And I'll start off by saying, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in anything motherhood, but I am going to very strongly stick to the idea that mothers and father, like, there's no hierarchy in importance there. Like, I think that and what strong means for a mother is different than what it might mean for a father, but a strong mother figure is just as important as a strong father figure. Back to your question about the family unit, it's the family unit, right? We are not another piece in society that has started off with good intentions, but has been twisted, is equality. Like, yes, we are all created equal, but within the family unit, the mother isn't supposed to be the same as the father, and that's why they work well together, right? So, I'm not going to speak to this is how you should be as a mother kind of thought processes, but I think that there is certain things that a boy needs from his father. There's certain things that a girl needs from his father. And the same is true for the mother. There's certain pieces that need to be present. And so finding that balance in a relationship, in a family unit, in a household is incredibly important. And it's going back to that piece on humility. Like, I talk to a lot of dads who think that because they're at work earning money and their wife is staying home, stereotypical perhaps, that they're more important. And it's like, well, we're all important pieces of this, right? I think being at home all day with the kids is a full-time job. It's an incredibly hard job. I always told my wife, I was like, listen, I think I could do it. Like, I think I could be a full-time stay-at-home dad, but, like, it's way harder than what I'm trying to do in building a business. And so, I think that balance between the two roles is incredibly important. They're both equally important. They both play an equal role. And, my work is very much focused on fatherhood, because I'm looking at my role as a father, and I'm working with other dads on becoming better men, husbands, and fathers. But that doesn't mean that that the role of and importance of a mother is diminished in my eyes at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, you cut out slightly, but I got the most of it, and it's been pretty solid overall. But yeah, like I just I don't even need to bring it to this topic because I feel like it's just a rabbit hole. But like sometimes, like there probably is a reason why, you know, there is like a mother and a father required for a family. Like people are like saying, oh, two fathers can do it, two mothers, and it's like, well, we just don't know. Like it seems like what seems to work is a mother and a father, but we don't really need to dive into that, like the gay marriage topic too much, just because I'm not as interested in diving into that as much. What I'm like, what I'm more interested in is also like, what do you feel like brings together well, first I'm going to say this. It's like, what habits have you implemented so that you can be an emotionally present father? You're talking about like how you could be there physically, you could be there financially providing, but it's like, what habits have you implemented so that you can be that emotional role model, that person who's there for them in that sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, habits is a key word in that question that I want to kind of hammer home, because a lot of times, the way my brain works is I become like hyper focused on a project in front of me. And I think that is to a certain extent a masculine tendency. I'm not saying that all men have it. I'm not saying that no women have it, but I know that a lot of men have this hyper focused on the project at hand. Now that could be like survival, or that could be the business I'm building, or it could be, whatever project is in front of me. Like, let's get to work, let's fix it, like hyper focused to the extent of missing things that are important that just happen to not be that thing you're focusing on right now. And it goes back to the beginning of my story. The impetus for any habit that I put into place, and habit is important because it allows me to hyper focus on these projects that I'm working on without missing out on the kids, without missing out on my wife. I try and systemize it. I try, the way I use it, it's not the most flattering phrase, but I try and idiot proof it, right? Like set it up so that Locke can't screw this up, and make it a habit. So that's key. But the impetus behind all the habits is times that I've screwed up, right? So times that my daughter is trying to tell me about something that happened and I'm distracted responding to an email on my phone. And I realized too late after the fact that, okay, now we have a rule, put the phone down, right? Like one of my wife's best friends shared this rule with us. And it's like, anytime any one of the kids walks into the room and tries to talk to you, if you have a phone in your hand, put it down, because they're going to remember that. They're going to remember the opposite, and they're going to remember that. And so it became a rule or a habit of, okay, here are like the phone zones in our house. Like my desk is, you can be on the phone. This room, you can be on the phone. Everywhere else, no phones, because the kids are going to see that. And that's a really common issue in modern technology, right? But, in terms of habits, like I'll give you a couple of things. I'm looking at like things I would schedule into my calendar, right? So my wife was fantastic at making it non-negotiable. We have 4 kids. Before, I think we started this when we only had 2. Every month, one of the kids goes on a one-on-one date with one of the parents. And so like 1 month I have 2 of them and my wife has the other 2. Mommy dates, daddy dates, right? Like they get to kind of pick what they're doing within reason. We're not going shopping with the, no limit credit card or anything like that. But, like fun stuff, they get to pick what we're doing, but it's time devoted to them. And it's like that came about from a general feeling of I'm getting too sucked into work. And I need to proactively, and this came from my wife, it was her idea. I need to proactively put it in my calendar, constructive, like tangible time. We're getting out of the house. We're going somewhere. It's a date with daddy or it's a date with mommy, and make sure that they feel like they're getting that special quality time. And that's one thing. We do family meetings with our kids, and, sometimes they don't want to do it. Sometimes they'll resist. But one piece of that is like, well, what do you guys think has been going well this week or the past 2 weeks if we haven't done it? And they have input into how the family runs. Like, obviously they can't say dessert for breakfast. Like that's what we need to do. But they can say, I don't like how, like, and they have called us out on how we've handled certain things. And so that's one thing. One of the things, and I haven't really been able to make this a habit, but this idea, this pain of regret thing seems to run through how I parent. I've spent a lot of my life looking back on with regret on how I handled certain things, even back to childhood. And this phrase has stuck with me ever since the first time I heard it, that your words become their inner voice. And so the way that you talk becomes your children's inner voice that they carry around with them forever. And if you wouldn't be happy with your voice being on repeat in your child's ears, then you've got some work to do, right? And so I keep going back to that. And I guess the habit might be reflection, right? Like if I did it this morning. Okay. I'm sitting down, I'm doing some work, getting ready for a call I had before this one, doing some work, getting ready for this. And one of my kids walks in. We homeschool all 4 of our kids, which I don't know if we had talked about that yet. One of my kids walks in and needs something, and I feel myself getting snappy because it's like I have my agenda. I have my stuff that I'm trying to accomplish. I got a little bit of pressure on me. Timing is running out of time. And one of my kids walks in and needs something, and I hear myself start to snap or just talk rudely. And I went back to that place. Do I want that child walking around talking to themselves in between their ears like I just talked to them for the rest of their lives? I had this moment where I asked myself this question a couple of years ago, and it was in a conversation that my wife and I were actually an Instagram live that my wife and I were doing. And we're talking about this idea, your words become your child's inner voice. And I said, this question that I asked myself is, if anybody else talked to my kids the way that I do sometimes when I'm not at my best, if I heard you talking to one of my kids the way that I do when I'm not at my best, I might knock you out. And when I realized that, I was like, oh my God, like that right there was like a punch in the gut. And so this habit of reflecting, did I handle this well? Do I need to go apologize? How do I take accountability for this? Knowing that our kids view us as superheroes. And if I snap at my son, he's not going to take that as, oh, daddy's having a bad day. He's going to take that as, oh, I did something wrong. So now I need to go own that, right? I need to go say, hey, I'm sorry that I snapped at you when you came in the room. I was a little bit stressed. I don't want you to think you did anything wrong. Just like, this is my stuff. And so that habit of reflection, that forcing myself to apologize, even when I could probably escape the situation without having to apologize and own it. That's an important habit. And I'll give you one more that I've just started implementing now, because this was incredibly powerful. I read a book. I've read it before, but I'm revisiting it. It's called Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. It's a fantastic book for men. He and his wife wrote a book for women as well, but it's about rediscovering a man's heart and what that means. Great book, but there's one piece of it that just like, it just stuck with me. He's talking about the one running question that every boy and man asks and wants answered. And the question is, do I have what it takes? And then you can nitpick the question and you can say, well, maybe there's some other important questions. But this question, it really hit home for me as a man. Do I have what it takes? All the fears that I have are around not being strong enough, smart enough, good enough problem solver, not having what it takes, right? And I forget exactly how he phrased it, but the question that a girl is asking is basically, am I enough? And again, you can nitpick the question, like maybe this isn't the only question they're asking. That's not the point. The point is, my daughters are looking to me and my wife, but I can only control me. My daughters are looking to me to answer the question, am I enough? And my son is looking to me to answer the question, do I have what it takes? So here's how I made that into a habit. And at the very least, I say this, and I just started this last week. At the very least, I say this to them every night when I'm putting them in bed. And I'm trying to say it as much as I can throughout the day. But I'm looking at my son and I'm saying, I'm proud of you. That's my version of like, you have what it takes, right? Maybe sometimes I'll switch it into you have what it takes. But right now it's, I'm proud of you. Because, as an aside, one thing I've screwed up, him being the oldest, him being the only boy, him being almost like exactly identical to me, and the things that I don't like about me, is I'm incredibly hard on him. And the last thing I want him thinking is that I'm not proud of him. So I'm proactively fixing that. So I'm going to tell him I'm proud of him every night before he goes to bed, and as often as I can, to the point of like being annoying, because he's almost a teenager. He's probably going to be like, Dad, shut up. And to my daughters, like, you are enough. You're enough exactly the way you are. They're going into a world that's going to spend all day telling them that they are not enough. So I'm going to tell them before they can hear that message over and over again that they are enough, until those thoughts are running on repeat in their heads, right? My son is on repeat. My voice becomes his inner voice in a great way. He's saying, I have what it takes, and I know my dad is proud of me. And my daughters are saying, I am enough exactly the way I am. And if I can do that, then, if I can turn that into a habit, then I can, back to that phrase, not the most flattering, but then I can idiot proof it. Then even when I make mistakes, because we're not all perfect, I just go back to the habit, and I make sure that even though maybe I was hard on him today for whatever, that he knows before he puts his head down on the pillow that I'm proud of him every single night. And I told my wife that, and I told him that I was going to do it for accountability. And I'm telling you now, for accountability. If I just, oh yeah, I'll make this a habit and I won't tell anybody about it, then maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. I told my wife about it so that she knows that I'm supposed to be doing it. She can check in on me if she needs to. I told my son that I'm going to be telling him that all the time. And if I don't, then he's going to start to think, well, daddy doesn't do what he says he's going to do. And that's another pet peeve of mine that I will not have. I'm going to do what I said I'm going to do. So, that's one habit that I'm still putting in. It's brand new. Like, I'm not going to pretend I'm perfect. I'm not going to pretend I've been doing that for my son's 12. I'm not going to pretend I've been doing that for the past decade. It's been sorely missing. And so I'm fixing it now.
Wow. Yeah, I've been writing down all kinds of notes of like just things that I can learn from this, because it's like, wow, I'm just trying to unpack all that you said, because there's so much good. Like, I like that, the intentional time with the kids of like, I have this idea of like when I'm a parent, like having like the dinner table be like a time in which I ask the kids how they're doing truly, like mentally, how they're doing physically, all these different things. Like, and that's like, I see like, having an intentional like month or so where it's like, I'm focusing on time with this person, with this kid intentionally. And like that intentionality seems so important, because it seems like sometimes people just have this like, oh, it's not that important. And if they don't have these intentions and they don't have this accountability set up with their wife or with other people, it's like they easily can fall off the train. And I'm just kind of overwhelmed with all the positive things that you seem to have been implementing. Like, I know the importance of like, I'm very glad that I had two parents of like my mom and dad always saying that they were proud of me and that I could do a lot of things, or like that I could accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. They believed in me. They knew I had what it takes, just like you're saying to your son. Like, I'm just seeing the value in that. Like, I know some people I grew up with, like, they didn't have that same kind of family helping them out. And like you're saying, like, society's going to be telling men, oh, you don't have what it takes, or oh, you shouldn't pursue manlyhood. Or they might be saying to the women like, oh, you aren't enough, you aren't beautiful enough, you aren't pretty enough, you aren't smart enough, whatever. And it's like, if you're able to at this age tell them and like, convince them that they are enough and they do have what it takes, and that like, then they're going to have such confidence in themselves, and they're going to know that, well, even if someone mentions to me that they don't think I'm enough, I know I'm enough because I've been hearing it my entire life, because I am enough. And like, man, I also really loved that idea of like, what you say is going to rattle in their head for maybe their entire life. Like, you never know. And so it's like truly taking time to reflect. And like you said, no one's perfect, and it's impossible to strive for perfection. But it's like, if you're taking the time and intention to really think about what you're saying, how you're going to say it, when you're going to say it, why you're going to say it to the children, it's like, man, that's setting yourself up to be the best version of yourself, and setting up your kids to have a great role model. And I really I really like that. And
Yeah, I do want
I
to
guess,
say, I want to jump back in
man,
and just interrupt you for 1 second, because I do want to point out, like, well, I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate you sharing that and saying how powerful that is. And I want anybody listening to understand I am not perfect. These came about because I screwed things up so badly that I had to repair them. Right. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, that's easy for him to say, like, he's got his shit together. Like, no, I still don't. Right. The reason that Frederick Douglass quote, where it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. I have a soft spot for broken men because I was one. And in a lot of ways, I still am one. Okay. The things that I talk about, they are hard learned lessons through screwing them up, through failing, through, like we talk about on our podcast, my wife, Ashley, and I, we learned that this is the right way to do it because we were at the point where we thought maybe we weren't going to make it in our marriage. Right. And we put in the work and we're doing much better now, but we still screw stuff up. I still screw stuff up with my parents, with my children, I mean. And so I don't want anybody listening to think that I'm perfect. And I don't want anybody listening to think that, like, it's too late to start either, right? Don't compare yourself to me. Compare yourself to yourself. And so it's like, here's I don't know how many things I just listed off. Take one and start implementing it. And then when it becomes a habit, take another. Find a habit from someone else. Just start making slow progress into becoming a better man, husband, father, wherever you're looking to improve. Stop comparing yourself to other people, because that's one of the biggest traps, right? Like, we talk about social media as a highlight reel. Okay. So your reality, your real life, the screaming child you had to deal with when you woke up this morning is not going to compare to Locke's life as he's talking about it on a podcast, where he's saying, well, here's the 5 great things that I do. I wasn't asked about the last 5 things that I screwed up today, right? Like, I've screwed up plenty of things today. And so don't compare your reality to a highlight reel that you're getting from whether it's a podcast or social media. I'm not perfect. I still screw stuff up. And be inspired, be encouraged by what I'm saying, but don't take it as I have everything together. And the other thing, is never too late to start doing these things, even if your child is almost out of the house. So.
Yeah, that's great advice. Like, that's kind of why I do these podcasts. It's like, I take these lessons from different people, take it with a grain of salt. Not everyone, like, sometimes the things that work for some people don't always work for others. And maybe I'm going to have my own strategies, but it's like being able to see, like, different habits you've been able to implement. And just like, if I'm able to ask tons of people these kinds of questions throughout the next 10 years, it's like, hopefully I'm going to have, like, such a plethora of different examples and ideas and thoughts that I've been able to wrestle through. And yeah, I see that as, like, you're a role model to me because, you're older, you're already in that phase, and you're saying, yeah, don't, I'm not perfect and I make mistakes, and, well, don't compare yourself to me. But it's like, yeah, I'm just trying to take in the info and just learn and grow. And I'm excited to just reflect on the things that I've written down. And you mentioned something that reminds me, let's see, I was curious, like, do you feel like, man, I lost what I was going to say, but do you feel like kids bring a marriage together, or do you feel like kids sometimes, like, draw a marriage apart? Like, do you feel like it could be either or both, or like?
Yeah, that it could be either
I guess
or both.
Also, what steps? Yeah.
Go ahead with your question.
I guess what steps, like, do you ensure? Yeah, like, what steps do you implement to make sure that your marriage is solid as well, along with, the family that you're creating? Like, because sometimes maybe you could spend so much time with the kids that you forget to spend time with the marriage, with your wife. Like, I'm curious, like, what advice do you have for, like, well, I have 3 questions. I know I already asked one, but I have a few more. Like, what's your best advice for a single guy trying to be a person who finds a wife? And what would you also say, like advice for married couples? And then final question, like, do you feel like having kids strengthens a marriage or separates a marriage sometimes?
Yeah, those are three powerful questions. Start with, so you said young men, okay? I have like so many things. I'll rattle through some of them quickly, okay? I think you hit on, as you're mentioning the podcast, having people on, taking advice, you hit on one of them. So like, think for yourself, question everything in this world, learn to be a critical thinker, which is very different than just being a contrarian, right? Disagreeing for the sake of disagreement. Listen to people's advice, run it through the filter of your own life and your values and your vision, and take the pieces that work for you. That'd be one thing. Don't start following one person and believe everything they say without thinking through it. I talk to my kids about this idea of role models and anti-models, and how they can even be the same person sometimes. You can have role models that you want to be like. You can have anti-models that you don't want to be like, right? I know people who they look at parenting as, I'm going to do everything the opposite of what my parents did because they were horrible. Like, that's a perfect example of an anti-model. But I had this conversation with my son a month or so ago. I can be both for him. I know that there are things in me that he wants to be like, a role model sense. And I know there are things in me that he can't stand and he would never want to emulate, either because they're bad. I have bad qualities for sure, or they're just not him, and that's fine. And I want my kids to know that's fine. And I would say that to any young men, whether it's your parents, whether it's your friends. You can have friendships with people who like, they're good people, but I don't want to be like them. Maybe. We were talking about investing earlier. I mentioned I love investing. My favorite thing I ever learned from investing, and this is like hugely critical advice that I would give any young person, my children, anyone. I learned this from investing, and I'll give you like the investing explanation and then we can relate it to life. But the lesson is, the majority is always wrong. Okay. So in investing, if you're a successful investor, what that means is you get above average returns, right? You make more money than the average person. To get above average returns, by definition, you cannot be taking average action. You cannot be making average investments, or you can't be doing what the average person does. Now take that into your life. If you want to be more than average in anything, sports, school, as a man, as a husband, as a father, anything, you cannot be taking the average action, the normal action. You have to reject average. You have to reject status quo. And so the majority is always wrong. Yeah, the majority of people will run out of a burning building. In that case, the majority is right, right? But in the sense of like looking at parenting, looking at life, what most people are doing is, even if it's okay, even if it's not morally wrong, if you do what most people are doing, you're going to get the results that most people are getting. And so I'm not saying that you're wrong if you're doing something that a lot of people are doing, just as long as you're okay with the results that a lot of people are getting. If you want more, so my tagline, my thought process, like what I do in my mission is to build uncommon men, husbands, and fathers. The word uncommon is important to me. If I want uncommon results, we need to start taking uncommon action. And so that would be one of the biggest things advice I would offer young men. And another one of my favorites is this concept of crabs in a bucket. I don't know if you've heard about crabs in a bucket. It's a metaphor. I've had people tell me, I've posted about this before. I've had people tell me that it's not true. So I looked it up and I Googled it. And as far as I can tell, this is true. Even if it's not true though, it's a fantastic metaphor. So here's what crabs in a bucket is. When you catch crabs, okay, so I'm from New England. I live in New Hampshire right now, but I grew up in Massachusetts. When you catch a bunch of crabs, to like bring them to a restaurant to cook them, and you put them in a bucket, something really interesting happens. When it's just one crab in the bucket, they're pretty nimble little guys. They can find a way to climb out. But when you put more than one crab in a bucket, when you put a group of crabs in a bucket, what happens is one crab starts to try and climb out, and the other crabs will pull him back down into the bucket. They seem to have this attitude of, if we can't get out, then you can't. And if he keeps trying to climb out, they will actually rip his legs off. And now I was able to confirm that this is true. I was not able to confirm the whole leg ripping off thing. But as far as I'm concerned, the metaphor by itself is fantastic. There are going to be people in this life who don't want to see you succeed, who don't want to see you get better. And it's not because they're evil. It's not because they're bad people, but it's because of how your success makes them feel. If they are not confident in themselves, if they don't love themselves, if they don't feel valuable, and they see you succeeding, it's going to highlight those feelings in themselves. And they're going to, without knowing what they're doing, they're going to lash out at you, right? Like waking up is going to threaten people who don't want to, they want to stay asleep. Healing yourself is going to threaten people who want to stay hurt. Okay. Like that kind of line of thinking. So when you experience that, take it as a compliment. When you're growing and someone tries to pull you back down, yeah, that, especially if it's a family member, that's going to hurt. But take it as a sign that you're on to something good. Because if you were just normal, if you were just average, nobody would be worried about pulling you back into the bucket. Okay, so if you take a positive turn in your life and the crabs start to pull you back down, take it as a sign that you're onto something good. And the flip side of that is never, ever be a crab to other people. Catch yourself. Now that you've heard the metaphor, if you ever start to kind of go down that road, you'll probably catch yourself and you'll be like, oh yeah, that guy on that podcast talked about crabs in a bucket. I'm doing it. I got to stop. And so I think that that's hugely important, especially to young people, young boys in particular, because, you know, I'm sure young girls can be pretty vicious to each other too. But having only experienced being a young boy, I know I've experienced crabs in a bucket as a boy. Like a group of boys, somebody tries to do the right thing, and other people will call him out as like he's doing something wrong, right? So in terms of your first question, advice I would give young men, that all hits it. That hits it on the head. Married couples, never stop working on yourselves. I think that's the number one thing that I learned. My wife and I just yesterday came back from what we call like a quarterly getaway, right? I'm not proud to admit that I resisted this kind of concept early in our relationship, but somebody explained it to me this way. And, you know, so here's what we try and do. We try and do like an annual planning session, typically around New Year's, right? And then we do, that's one of our 4 quarterly retreats. And then we do 3 other quarterly retreats throughout the year. Get away, like we went away, not far, because we have, you know, one of our youngest is fairly young. We stayed pretty close, but we got away. We went to a hotel. We went to an inn. Spent some time planning, reviewing our annual stuff, reviewing our goals and that stuff. Spent some time having some fun, reconnected. Monthly, we go on dates, out of the house dates monthly. We've been slipping on our weekly kind of stay at home Friday night, date night stuff. We do relationship check-ins every week. We do a lot of different stuff. We're reading a relationship book together and discussing it. Again, these are things that we slowly put in place. We're not perfect. These are habits that we slip up on. But I had it explained to me once. If you were running a business, because I'm an entrepreneur, ever since I stopped teaching, I've been an entrepreneur. I've run a business. I've sold a business. I've now started another business of my own. If you were running a business, you would look at these things as a given. Annual retreats, quarterly check-ins, monthly calendar updates, planning check-ins, weekly, even daily team meetings. It's just a given in running a business. So why aren't you doing that in your relationship? Because your relationship is far more important than any business you could ever own. And if that's without even touching on all the ripple effects, like then now throw some kids into the picture and it's like, well, now it's affecting them. You better get your act together. You better continue developing this relationship, this model that you are showing your kids. But even if you're pre-kids and you're looking at it like this, maybe you probably don't want to implement all of those at the same time, but start throwing those things in. There's no shame. Back to this idea of shame. There's no shame in having to put things into your calendar. That's how my brain works. If it's not in my calendar, I start to fill my calendar with other things. And if I'm laser focused on building a business and my relationship gets left by the wayside, you know, things aren't going well. And so interesting enough, like I said, we just got back from this yesterday. And we did, we reviewed a lot of things. And that goes back to my point, like the number one piece of advice for married couples, or even, if you're thinking about getting married, but you're not there yet, never stop working on your relationship. And one of the things that my wife and I talk a lot about with our clients that we work with is, even if you have kids and you think that your kids are the most important priority, we talk about the hierarchy between self, relationship, and kids. And even if you think your kids are your top priority, the most important thing on earth, like if you're a stay-at-home mom and your identity is I'm a mom, like my kids are my everything. I wake up thinking about them. I go to sleep thinking about them. I applaud that, and I'm not saying that's the wrong attitude. But even if that is where your mind is at, you should be taking care of your relationship first, because your relationship trickles down to your kids. If your relationship is rocky, you could still be a good parent, but you can't be a great parent because you're stressed about your relationship. You're fighting with your husband or your wife. So your relationship has to come before your kids, not because your kids aren't important, but because it ripples down. And before that, and this goes to the married couple or the boyfriend and girlfriend, priority over your relationship, not to the extent that your relationship is being neglected, but priority over your relationship is taking care of yourself. Because if you're a hot mess and your girlfriend or your wife is a hot mess, your relationship is going to suck. And it trickles down. So if you are in good shape, it's going to improve your relationship. And then if your relationship is in good shape, it's going to improve your parenting. And so you work backwards from this. If your identity is a mother or a father, your stay-at-home father or whatever it is, the kids are the most important thing. That's great. Take care of your relationship first. And then, married couples advice, take care of yourself. Feed yourself mentally and spiritually, and take care of yourself so that you can show up better in your relationship. And if we move on to the third question, which I think was something along the lines of kids adding to your relationship or not, I think that's obviously that's a different answer for everyone, but it's going to go back to I guess 2 points. The one I just made about the hierarchy of how things work, right? You flow into you trickle into your relationship, and your relationship trickles into your kids. And if you get that order mixed up, it's going to cause problems in your relationship. If you put your kids before your relationship, it's going to cause problems in your relationship. If you put your relationship before your kids, it will never cause problems with your kids. I know grown men. I had a coach once, a very highly paid coach, that told me once that he saw his parents always put their relationship first. And he saw his dad prioritize his mom over himself and his siblings. Not like neglectful, don't get me wrong, but like, I'll come help you in a minute. I'm in the middle of a conversation with my wife right now. It's very important to her that I finish. Or like, I know your football game is important, but I've had this date or this getaway with your mom scheduled for months. So I'll have to make it to the next football game. And I asked him if he was ever resentful about that. And he said no, because I saw the way they loved each other. And they gave us, back to this idea of modeling relationships, they gave us a model for what a good relationship was like. So that you screw up the priority of who comes first, kids or the relationship. Obviously there's some nuance. Obviously a newborn, different story, right? Like screaming 3-month-old baby needs to eat before you get to finish that conversation with your husband, right? But that would be where I would go with that. And then the other point is, we've hit on this, I think, repeatedly through our conversation, the idea of kids shining a spotlight on our wounds. I think having kids can be a powerful motivator to improve your relationship and to improve yourself. I think it can be a powerful spotlight shining on some wounds that either in your relationship or that are affecting your relationship and can help. And the flip side of that is, if you're not doing the work, it can obviously cause a whole lot of problems. So that, that last question, kids changing your relationship, it's a little bit dependent on where you are. But I think they can improve your relationship incredibly if you allow them to.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like the answers to a lot of those I really resonated with. Like I could see, like, I really like that idea of like prioritizing your significant other, because the kids will understand, and also the kids are going to see why it's so important to prioritize your spouse, because then they're so happy together. They love each other so much. And yeah, I really do like that. That's really cool. And also I asked 3 questions just because they all kind of lined up in some ways, but yeah, I have a few more questions I could go down.
Yeah.
How much time do you want to spend on this?
I'm good. Whatever you got, fire away.
All right. Yeah. So this is a interesting topic so the first episode I did on this podcast, it's kind of hilarious, but it's called The Morality of Porn and Masturbation, because since I was like 11, I've been exposed to porn, and then I was addicted from like age 11 to like, honestly, age 21. Like,
wow.
Not like, and I started this podcast honestly to just get that video out there of me talking about that topic, having that accountability, and it kind of was in and out. And like over the past 5 months, I've been completely free of that, that chain that's been shackled to me.
Good
and
for
like,
you.
I was just curious, like, why. I was going to hear from your perspective, like why like porn or something like that could ruin a marriage, ruin your ability to be a good father, etc. Just because that's motivation, honestly, for me. And I know a lot of guys who listen to this still struggle with porn, because like they'll reach out to me and say, that's kind of what this podcast was about in the beginning, like a walking away from porn. And I was just curious what you thought of all that.
That's so. First of all, good for you for asking the question. Good for you for making that change in your life. This is strangely, maybe not strange, but interestingly, something I come across a lot in the work that I do. Okay. You can talk about maybe the science behind it, but the easy dopamine hit of porn and masturbation, and how that is being played up in society, like there's all kinds of stuff we could pick apart there, but what it comes down to is I've seen firsthand through the men that I'm talking to, how easy it is for that to affect and destroy relationships. You've got trust issues there, but you've also got like energetic issues, and not just like sexual libido issues, like not just, the intimacy between people, but there's a whole lot of people who've written about this. And I don't know if this was part of your discussion. The book my mind goes to first is the Way of the Superior Man by David Data, which if any guy hasn't read, fantastic book. But he talks about how physically, like spiritual energy, physical energy, and mental energy draining pornography and masturbation is. And so like if you go, I forget the exact science, don't quote me on any of this, but like I've heard people write about like noticeable improvements in like business performance after I think 7 days and stuff like that. Like there's again, another rabbit hole we can go down, but like a spiritual warfare aspect to this as well. People that want you distracted and easy to control are playing this up, and I'm seeing the effects in marriages for sure. A lot of guys use this as a way to numb out. Well, it's better than cocaine. It's better than prostitutes, right? Like, but it's still numbing out. It's still a method of numbing out. And it's if you get into, so like what speaks really deeply to me as a father, taking the easy way out as a father, right? Like taking the easy way out this morning would be like the story I told you about getting a little snappy with my son as he came in. I was trying to focus. The easy way out would be A, not to admit that to you, and B, to go through the rest of my day like it never happened, instead of going downstairs when we're done and apologizing to him, right? But I spent my life taking the easy way out, back to regret in my past actions. I spent my whole life taking the easy way out. I'm not going to take the easy way out. And like numbing yourself, it could have served a purpose at one time. Maybe whatever method you use to numb yourself out. Sometimes it's a survival mechanism. Survivors of trauma they numb out so they don't have to relive the trauma in their heads, right? It helps them survive sometimes. But when they're ready to get past it, when they're ready to start growing, they need to stop the numbing behavior, and it's numbing behavior. Here's something else. It's funny. I have these moments where, I feel like, whether it's, I know you said you're fairly, you come from a religious background, and I would call it God, but if your listeners don't agree and they won't call it the universe, whatever you want to call it, certain things are lined up and put in front of me, right? I was just having a conversation with my wife yesterday about this topic on our quarterly retreat. And I was talking about a video that I have partially written out that I was going to make and put out about this idea of pornography. And I'll share, it's one of those things that I think it could be perceived as a little touchy, but you asked. And so it feels right in this context. The idea of the video is, when you become a father, especially to a girl, like, that should ruin porn for you forever. Because, and maybe I'll help ruin it right now. Like, if you're a father and you have a daughter and you still use porn, next time you do it, you're going to start thinking about your daughter, and not in like a creepy, weird way, but it's going to ruin it for you. And like, to that, I would say you're welcome. Okay. Because as a father, I look at the way that society has set up young girls, like teen girls, and either views them in one of two ways. One, it's like the over sexualization, like a sex object, right? And then in the same breath, people will turn around and like condemn them for the way that we've conditioned and programmed them. Okay. And so those same dads who are like, I'm either looking at it like, oh man, I can't believe society's going that way, or, my oldest daughter's only 8, but like, when she starts to get a couple years older, like, now I'm worrying about who she's hanging out with, and like what music she's listening to, what videos she's watching. It's like, if I'm going to turn around and then go and use porn, like, how big of a hypocrite does that make me? Not only how big of a hypocrite, but now it's like, it's one of those like mean tricks that I've played on myself. Now it's like, if I ever feel the urge, feel the desire, like, now I'm picturing one of my daughters, and I'm like, oh, that should be ruined for any man who has a daughter. And so that, it, strangely enough, was a conversation I was having yesterday. I'm kind of actually thankful that you brought it up, because it is such a powerful, destructive force in a lot of the men that I'm talking to. So, thank you for bringing that up, and I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, like, it's a topic that's kind of taboo, but it's like, if you look at the studies, it's like 90% of guys, it seems like, view it or started viewing it at like age 10 to 11 to 12. Like, it's just crazy. It's insane. But yeah, it's a great answer though. Like I have motivation just even like through my girlfriend, like that idea of like, women are always asking, are they enough? And it's like, if I watch porn, I'm going to just confirm to her that she isn't enough. And like, that's just something that, like, when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, that lines up perfectly with what how I'm walking away from the porn of like, yeah, girls are asking, are they enough? And like, if I were to do that, it's like, I could take two routes. The route of, my girlfriend is enough and all I would ever need in that dimension, or porn is what I need and my girlfriend's not enough. And it's like, it's an easy route to like, not easy, but it's like, every time I get the urge, I just think of that. And it's like, and now thinking about it from a father's perspective about the daughter, that's really interesting. Really, really well said. And
thank you.
I guess I was going to wrap it all up with like a final question of like, why do you feel like it's important for men to have like a group of men, like a men's group, or like role models, or like accountability, or any of these things, like where they can be vulnerable and open up? Why do you feel like that's important?
Yeah, see, that's a fantastic question. And I am the living example of why men do need that. So, a little bit of my personal story, that, the growth that I came through. I had, at one point, when my third child, my second daughter, was very young, I essentially had a mental breakdown. I realized the short version of the story is I didn't like myself. I definitely didn't love myself. In fact, I hated myself. And I had created this story of hate for myself from a young age for a lot of reasons. It became such a strong story that I was telling myself, like, I hate, at the time, I hated my name. I hate my clothes. I hate my haircut. I hate this, that, and the other thing. And it turned into like, okay, I started to believe the story that I hated myself. And so I had this breakdown when I realized that as an adult. I had never admitted that to myself as an adult. And I hit rock bottom. I had to break that hard to feel enough pain to make a change. And I started to, I love this expression, you fall into a hole, but you can't fall out. You have to climb out. So I started to climb out of the hole. And I started to do this self-work, this self-improvement. Up to that point, my self-improvement, and I don't love that term because it's been kind of hijacked by the status piece of society. To most guys, at least, self-improvement means becoming more successful in business, in picking up women, like whatever. What it really is becoming like a better person. So my self-improvement up to that point had been, how can I make more money? I was in sales, real estate. I owned a brokerage. It's like, how can I make more money? How can I recruit more people? How can I get them to sell more houses? And all this stuff. That was what self-improvement was. Self-improvement then became actually what it should be, like growing myself for the sake of being better, a better man, a better husband, a better father. But I was still stuck in a few things. The shame of needing to admit these things to other people scared me. So I tried not to admit it to other people. I tried to do all the work I could do on my own. And furthermore, it didn't seem like people that were like physically, geographically close to me, that there were many people doing similar stuff. So I felt a little isolated in that sense too. And so I tried to do it all myself. I tried to be the lone wolf, right? And there's a certain point you can do a lot of this work, this self-work by yourself. It's almost kind of contradictory to think that you can't do it by yourself. You can do a lot of it by yourself. You can get to a certain point, and that point may be different for me and you. But at a certain point, I realized, and my wife had been saying this to me for a while, but I really resisted. I was scared to admit what I had screwed up to other people. That shame, right? I tried to lone wolf it. I tried to lone wolf it for a really long time. And before I realized that, and here's I don't know if this is a cliche or just a great expression, lone wolves either die or go back to the pack. Okay, one of my good friends, and actually the guy that ran the first men's group I was in, he added, lone wolves don't raise cubs. Because that was really powerful. Lone wolves don't raise cubs. You can't be a father and be a lone wolf, right? But to your question about men's groups, specifically men's groups, we to get to the deep healing, we need to be in a group of other men, because it's so important to us to have acceptance, but it's also important to us to like air out what we are screwing up. We need an environment of accountability and brotherhood. We are, as much as like I'm a hardcore introvert, and I don't go out and people is what we call it sometimes. I don't go people as much as a lot of other people, but I still am rooted in our ancestry of being tribal creatures, right? We need this brotherhood. We need this accountability. And in order to grow, we need to be able to be held accountable by other men. A lot of the guys I talk to were raised without a father, or their father wasn't necessarily a strong presence in their life. Some guys like myself, I had a very strong mother, and we start to steer away from strong men, and strong in a good sense, like steady. They're intimidating to us, right? And so we shy away from this idea of a group of men who are improving themselves, who are going to hold you accountable, who are going to have a little bit of fire if you need a little bit of fire, but are also going to have acceptance of what you've gone through, because we all struggle with the same things to a certain extent. Our problems aren't really that special, not in a mean way, but like you're not the only person struggling with whatever you're struggling with. And being able to experience that in a group, that fire, that accountability, but also that acceptance, that idea that, like, back to that question, am I enough? You still are enough. You're struggling with the same thing I'm struggling with. I didn't know anybody else struggled with that. That is incredibly powerful. And whatever your threshold for lone wolfing it is in your growth, whenever you hit that ceiling, the group, a group is what's going to take you to the next level. I talked to some guys about getting into men's groups that I run, and it's like they're kind of skeptical. And I take the stance of, because I'm not a hard sell kind of guy. I take the stance of, okay, well, you keep trying to lone wolf it, and when you realize that lone wolves either die or come back to the pack, I'll be here waiting for you, and I'm not going to judge you because I did it too. And some guys just need to keep banging their head against the wall until they join a group. And when they join a group, they'll discover how much they needed it. And I'm living example of that. I can be incredibly stubborn. And I used up all of my stubbornness trying to prove that I could do it on my own before I had like a universe or God reached down and smacked me upside the head, gave me a wake up call and said, all right, you're joining this group and you're getting to work. And I did. And that kind of set me on the trajectory that I'm on now. So I can't understate how important I think it is both to accept help, period. But like I do one-on-one coaching and I do group coaching. I always urge men to go into the men's groups first, even though I can make more money off of you putting you in one-on-one coaching. It's not about the money. That's going to be most beneficial to you being in a group, because you asked about the family unit. The other thing that stems from the family unit, that conversation we had earlier, is guys are not being raised by groups of other guys with this type of brotherhood and accountability. This concept is entirely foreign to a lot of people. Our definition of a group of guys is like the basketball team in high school, where, we talk about girls and having sex and we make fun of each other. And, it's not what true brotherhood is. It's like, I forget where I heard this first, but it's like, that's bros. That's not brothers, right? You need brothers in your life. You don't need bros. And I'm stealing that from somebody. I wish I could remember who said it first, but that's the aspect that I had to learn. And, back to learning something the hard way, right? I've been saying this the whole time we've been talking, that I had to learn the hard way. And so that's why I do the work that I do in running those groups and doing that.
Yeah, it's really amazing to hear. Like, I'm blessed to live with a roommate of mine who I've known since like 6th grade. He and I are true brothers. Like, we have a group, even with just us two, vulnerably explaining everything. And just having that alone has really helped me. And like, I can see the importance of like going to like a small group from a church. I'm just less of a person who enjoys going to church, but I've also found huge utility in like going to counseling, like for myself, even like just like every week or every other week, going to someone and just being vulnerable. It's painful. Like, I don't want to go and explain what I messed up on, but it's like, I am now able to, like, the weight that's lifted. It's like, wow, like you're not alone in this struggle. And like, the counselor or the person, or if they're a true friend, they're not going to like stop being your friend if you mention to them that you made an error. It's like, they're going to want to, they might tell you messed up, but like, they're going to want to, if they're a true friend, they're going to want to see you improve. And so it's like, yeah. I agree with that lone wolf analysis where it's like, I know a lot of guys and girls sometimes where they're just like, oh, I don't have to talk to anyone about my problems. I can keep it bottled inside and I can solve it alone. I've done it before. It's like, well, honestly, I don't think you technically can solve your problems alone. Like, if you don't verbalize what you're thinking, they're just going to be these thought movies in your head of like, and like, you could be incorrect in what you're thinking. Like, I always make this joke of like, solitary confinement is the worst prison statement ever. It's worse than being put in a room of rapists. It's like, it's terrible to put yourself in an environment where you're unable to vocalize your thoughts. It's like, you go technically crazy. And so it's like, I love that idea of like having a true friendship or a group of men or a counselor or really anything. And that's kind of like why I wanted to ask this question, is like a call to action to people, where it's like, if you're able to find whether it be a church small group, a men's group online, a counselor, a friend, someone you can confide in and be vulnerable with. I just see that as like, honestly, the path that led me out of that led me to the person I am today. Like, even just like creating this podcast, that's a unique example, but like me being vulnerable with the world about my problems and people resonating and saying, wow, thank you for making that. You're not alone. It's like, it just highlights the importance of accountability. And like you said, lone wolves can't raise cubs,
Yeah.
you just can't do it alone. And like that, it's a lie that sometimes people tell themselves, oh, I don't have emotions, I don't have to open up to anyone, I can do it alone. It's like, it's just not true, technically speaking. Even in regards to like psychology, you have to vocalize what you're thinking.
Yeah, it goes back to we were talking about the idea of
really amazing.
We were talking about the idea of average, right? It goes back to average. The majority is wrong, right? The majority of people think, oh, I don't need that. I don't need vulnerability. I don't need to feel my feelings. I don't need a group of people to hold me accountable. And if you're happy with average, then okay. But to your point, like, what a great call to action. If you don't want average, then you have to take that uncommon action of whether it's a group or a counselor or a coach or church or whatever you're looking at. You have to take that uncommon action of being one of the few people who actually can put themselves out there into an uncomfortable situation, because it is uncomfortable a lot of times, and you're not going to get uncommon results unless you do that.
Yeah, I love that call to action. And I really do think that's a great place to stop. We covered so many different things regarding like the importance of self-reflecting upon your own actions, the importance of recognizing that mistakes are important in this journey, recognizing that you need to have others in your life in order to improve. And like, I really think this was an amazing episode, and I hope those who listened really were inspired, because I truly was. And I really appreciate you coming on, Locke. If you have anything else you want to say before you head out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity to get out in front of a bunch of people who might not normally hear from me. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I'm sure this won't be the last time that we get together and share some ideas. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I will definitely throw the links in the description, but he's got a podcast called Trailblazers and Chainbreakers, and he's also got a very, very fascinating Instagram page that I recommend to everyone. I'll throw all those in the description, and yeah, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.